Welcome back to the InfoSec Notes Show. I'm Josh Amishav, and this is episode 73. Today I'm joined by Higinio Ochoa for a behind-the-scenes look at Anonymous and the methodologies they use. Now, we're not going to go too deep into his story. It's been covered extensively elsewhere, but if you're not familiar with it, check out episode 63 of Darknet Diaries. Today, I want to drill into the more technical side of his hacks, which ultimately landed him in jail. Surprisingly, though, the same methodology can be used when applied to bug bounties as well. My three main takeaways from a conversation were: 1, how he built his target list; 2, his 2 OpSec mistakes that led him to getting caught; and 3, what his favorite tools for hacking are. You'll enjoy those few things plus a bunch of other tips along the way. Direct support for this podcast comes from BreachSense, the data breach monitoring platform. More details can be found at breachsense.io. And now, here's my conversation with Higinio Ochoa, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. How you doing?
Great. So, who are you and what do you do?
Well, as you mentioned, my name is Higinio Ochoa. I'm a hacker by night. I work in healthcare during the day, and I'm one of the Secure Samurai.
What's the Secure Samurai?
That's our public research group we have. Just a group of hackers hang out, hack on things, you know. We're big in the, I don't know if you saw the Forbes article or not, that we worked out. A couple of us worked with them. We've been all over the news, India, a bunch of crazy stuff.
What kind of research do you do?
Mostly VDPs, bug bounties, and that kind of thing. We just go around and just protect the infrastructure that we kind of feel we're a part of.
Cool. Okay. So you've got a fascinating story that I want to dig into, but before we do that, how did you get started hacking?
Well, it all started back in the day of just having internet, right? Like I started off actually, and it's a funny story. I actually started off being really heavy into phreaking, right? Like hacking in itself, phreaking is like a subsection of hackers where we really just spent our time trying to hack into phone systems and then use that to talk to other people.
And this was before things like asterisks, so you couldn't like SSH in
Right.
or go to the port. So how did that work back in the day?
There's a much more physical thing, right? Like making lineman headsets, right? So you got these 2 physical copper wires, and to hijack, like, say, your neighbor's phone, right? You'd go and take a box open, and you'd physically connect these wires, and that would give you their ringtone. Okay, so you hook that on a coupler, and there's the internet. If you sit there and dial some numbers, you can get into other boxes and use those, right? So, like I said, it's about community. Like, you'd have to hack just to get into those. The curiosity from computers came from a really young age. So for me, it was, again, kind of just here's some computers, and I fell in love. So I have a history from I learned to get onto AOL, right? I don't know if you remember those days of the old CDs by the Daily, just boxes of them, right? That's 30 days. So at the very least, I had 30 days, right? Now I just needed a credit card on that account. Back in those days, the real credit card numbers even matter. You could just generate fake ones off of like real prefixes. So, knowing these little hacks is what moves you forward as a young hacker. The first, again, that was more of like abusing a system, right? But my first actual hack was at a library. I'm looking for books, and I go look up a book. I hit enter, and it kind of just hangs there. So I go to hit the back button to erase the name because I realize it's wrong, and that drops an error. So then you're hitting escape and hitting all these other little command things, and boom, shell drops. There it is, that nice little pretty root sign. Okay, cool. What system is this? How do I find out what IP is? If I do this on the box next to it, is that a different IP? Is that a different? So I go over there and I try to do this, try to simulate the same thing. Oh, cool. It's just this combo connection. So then using that combo, boom, 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 now you have all those IP addresses, right? Well, what's the login? Is there a password? No, these are dumb shells, man. They just, you telnet into them and boom. Okay. I mean, back then you were doing things just to get access to it, right? Once you were on it, what do? Well, that's a whole other story, and that's just how people learn.
Now, at that point, you didn't have tools like, I don't know, maybe you did like Nmap or any of the common tools that you have now that you do to like reconnaissance, mass scan. None of those existed back then. So what tools did you use to exploit vulnerabilities?
Well, you're right. Back then there was Nmap. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Nmap's the one tool that I think only got better with time. But back in those days, it was hard enough to get online. That was the struggle, you know, getting into the hacking groups and learning all their little cool tricks. So like, oh, here's a way using the AOL webpage, right, to track down other AOL kids or other AOL people, get their information. And here's how you do IRC stuff. And oh, look, IRC, that opens up a whole new world of criminal enterprises and access to software and stuff, right?
Okay, and then fast forward to, let's say, 2011 time. Were you more politically active then, or how?
Yeah, yeah, so like around 2010, 2011, right, I got started in the anonymous movement, right? Actually, it was the Occupy movement, right? And so I started off really there and did the movement for a little while. I was a videographer. I did internet setups. I did I helped run a camp, with like their whole comms. Did all that stuff, right? I did recording of police, all that crazy stuff. So I wasn't just like a fanatic, right? Or I wasn't just like a fan of the movement. I was a fanatic. I was out there doing the crazy stuff. I was the dude who was like, let's fight the police, right? Like in the dumb way that I did. Um, and so yeah, I got really politically active, and from there joined Anonymous. Around the same time, you had the Julian Assanges, the Sabus, all the crazy drama that came with that, the arrests, right, and then the fallout of that.
And just about when you say you joined Anonymous, like, so Anonymous is like everybody, Anonymous is
Oh
nobody.
yeah.
What is that? How does one join Anonymous?
You just become anonymous. I mean, you could right now just be like, okay, well, I'm an anonymous, and I mean, I'd have to agree with you, right? Like, that's what it was more of like, hey guys, here's where a large portion of people who all claim to be anonymous hang out. So if you go there just to try to mix it up and you're just listening, right? It goes from that to, well, does anyone know how to do any kind of in-map scanning? Does anybody know how to do this? Does anybody know how to do that? And so eventually just make a name for yourself. For me, it was, oh, what are we doing? Oh, you're doing that? Okay, let me find targets for that, right? Like, just do it. And so as you move through this fluid of a group and move to line, then you start finding about all the crazy dramas in the background, right? You start finding about like how like really these two channels were ran by like two kids, and like it was just crazy, man. And it's what made it so fun. But eventually I broke off of that whole subsection and went looking because I wanted to be a little more uh, arrow, right? I wanted to be more pointed arrow than blunt block. So um, yeah, I started hanging out with the cabin crew, and from there I hacked everybody and ended up in prison. I mean, that's the that's the short of the skinny. I mean, we could take up probably two of these podcasts with everything in between, from getting into the mess, during the mess, the aftermath. It's been 10 years already from my arrest and or coming up to, and it's what I mean. Like,
Are
it's
you
been a
sick of telling
crazy.
the story?
No, no, I think it's for me. It's like, man, the story is really to the point of where it's almost unbelievable. Like I almost, it's one of those things where like instead of saying it so many times you believe it, like you say it so many times you're like, that's a great question, because I've done 4 or 5 interviews a day at one point where it just boom 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 boom, and it's like but there's so many people who hear the story and they're like, oh my god, I got so many questions, because
Yes,
there is
definitely.
it's so multifaceted, because at the same time I'm having a relationship with a woman, right? Like, while I'm rising to hacking, there's another story where I'm falling in love with this woman, and there's a whole backstory there. There's side quests on along the way. So there's a lot, for me, it never gets boring. A lot of cool stuff happens in between, and so I can pepper that in. And yeah,
All right, so let's talk about like the actual hacking part. So at some point you were doxing police, right?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, and then okay, so in order to do that, so you would find. I'm just thinking like now how one would do that. How was that done? I imagine the tool sets and stuff were very different back then. So did you have like a methodology that was
yeah. I mean,
used?
it wasn't super different. I mean, for instance, like SQL Map, right? SQL Map existed. Um,
But like okay, even to find the targets, right? So if you want to find right, you want to find targets. So today you can go to like CertSH or a mass, and you can
a
kind of
mass or yeah,
build
yeah.
exactly. Okay.
GAU, exactly. That's fair. Okay, so yeah, so we had no, there's lots of ways. All the hackers did it, but I'll tell you how I did it. So for me, it was about quantity, right? Not necessarily quality. For the particular police one, if you think about doxing like every firefighter, or if you think about doxing anyone, even every police officer, you understand that the ginormity of that, right? I guess that's the word, like how mind-boggling every police station, substations, all the connectors, organizations from unions. I mean, so for me, it was like, okay, let's pick things like SQL injections, administration panel bypasses, and any kind of extras, XSS, that kind of stuff. That's for like, let's find 5 or 6 of those, right? Come up with my payloads, and then we just need to searches. And back then, Google was the best. You could run your targets then through IPs and put them on Shodan, and then so like if you were doing things like Monsanto back in the day, all these big companies back then, you'd be able to kind of extrapolate a lot of that. But you take all that, you chunk it using Google Dorks, which was, I mean, that you guys, most people anyway, are taught that in colleges now.
Wait, so the target lists were built by using Google Dorks and then putting that to Shodan to find who has relevant ports open.
Well, if you even had to go that far. So if we take all of these websites that we found, we then need to say, okay, where are these parameters? Are these even injectable? Now, can you imagine running a full SQL map on every single one of those? So that's when have to start again. You have to start getting creative. Can we crawl these pages first and look for any injectable forms and parameters? Can we do we get any errors if we entered XYZ, right? So this is all self-coding in Python.
Was Python popular then or Perl? Or is that the beginning when Python?
No, Perl was there, but we use those for like the return calls back and stuff, right? Like shell, reverse shells and stuff. In this case, you're just writing something that you want it to be real quick. And yeah, Python. I wouldn't say it's big, but back then it was usable. You know, and we weren't writing big scripts. I use Bash a lot too. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, what's the next cool language?" Look, man, you can do 9/10 of the things that anybody else can do, and you can do it in Bash, and it's probably older than most of us.
And less
And
lines of code.
it's super. Exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can do it quicker in Python. You can probably do it better with error handling, all this other stuff.
Well, the execution for sure, but just to like, pipe curl with awk and sed and
Yeah,
yeah.
but if you got to take a list and you got to convert it to another list, sometimes that one-liner's, what makes your hunt different than someone else's. And so that's where we kind of focused. And so they had their ways. Each member of this group had their own methodology. I went for not so much pay and spray, more of like educated guess. And so I would hunt and break those down from there. Now those lists were shared between all of us, so everyone had their own little targets, but everyone just hunted differently.
Okay, and then everything was custom. Like everyone had their own custom scripts to find the
Yeah,
vulnerabilities.
yeah. I mean, I was also writing for the community, so I ran or I wrote at the time one of the first Twitter takeover scripts for hashtags. So like you'd be able to go on there and say you had a particular movement that you wanted to amplify. You would enter some stuff into the script, and you'd hit enter, and it would just go in through the trending hashtags, pragmatically insert itself into all these conversations. It was one, so did they happen back then? Yeah, but this was one of the first times I believe anyway that it was militarized like this, with the sole purpose to going crazy. And that's just how it was back then. Everyone had their own methodology and did it their own way. We just all got together and talked and kind of expanded. So I may find a hole, someone else may need to go and break it. Right. I may find or someone else may find it, and then I'll have to go in there and be like, oh, okay, I see what you did wrong here. Boom, we're in. Right. Or hey, look, that port over here is actually open. We can use those creds and use them over here. So it escalated differently depending on the attack.
Did you have any interesting OpSec controls that everyone had in place, or was it each man for themselves?
Well, I mean, we ultimately just kind of, yeah, each one for themselves. Like my personal one, like and again, this is one of those like operational, I don't know how to explain. It's just a weird thing to happen. So but I really did have for me anyway, I'm a visual guy, so I had a folder labeled essentially dirty and another one labeled clean. That way, anything that even the guys, right? So they would do a hack and they do screenshots and they send it to me. Well, I wouldn't want to put those online and have them scrubbed without having them scrubbed, right? Like just to keep my metadata off of them. So I said, okay, that's how we're going to do it. Um, and so yeah, you move these things and you scrub them, whatever. And I forget the exact reason, but I was like, I had 3 pictures of the wife already scrubbed, right, and ready to go out. And for whatever the
One sec, just back up. What was the how were you using the
uh,
picture? How are you using her pictures and
well,
what
the
you're doing?
first time I kind of wanted to show off, and so in one of my hacks I needed hot woman to show off on for. So hey, dress scattily, hold up a sign saying this, and take a photo. Send it to me, and I'll get you on the news tomorrow. You know, and she wouldn't believe me. Obviously, who believes that? No, I don't believe that at all. So take a selfie. You're joking around with some guy on the internet. Next thing you know, it's on the news, right? And like, so it was definitely shocking for her.
Okay, so she sent you these pictures.
hmm
You had them in the dirty folder, and then you'd scrub them before you would post them in
Well,
Twitter.
well, and they were never meant for Twitter, really. Like I said, it was meant for these defaces. and and then like I said, there was something that happened where I was like, oh shit, I got to use these, I got to tag my wife at that time, my girlfriend, tag her in it, and I want to put some hot bikini pictures. And so I had used those, and I needed 4, not and the fourth one was in the dirty. The 3 had already been scrubbed because those were going to go on defaces. And I was like, man, there's only one way this is going to work. So I just grabbed it from the dirty and said, I just hope nothing's on it. Put it in there. Hit send. About, I want to say 10 minutes later, I get a DM. Hey, I don't, yeah, I don't really know. Maybe you set it up, you know, but I'm pretty sure you're leaking data in those images. Okay. I go check, points right to her house. But what are you going to do? At that point, you really got to hope that the feds skip a beat. But it works. They say, the cops say, yeah, we got to be right that one time, blue team, right? We got to be right one time. Hackers got to be right one time. We got to be right every time. Well, not really. Like, we got to be right every time too, or we get caught, right? And so no matter how you twist it, that's the short and skinny of that. It was just literally, I knew the minute I dropped it. 10 seconds later, and I mean, it happens with throughout the OpSec. If you've read any of the early articles, it walks through like an instance where I messed up my 2 identities, right? Hidge and Wormer. So until, like, 'cause that was the thing that a lot of people don't understand. I had to live 2 separate lives. I had to be offline when this guy went to bed, and I had to operate on this guy. And so sometimes that was hard to juggle. And in a screenshot, it was leaked. And I caught it, but it was already dropped. So what do, right? You just gotta wait and wait, just let it go, and then hope it doesn't show up. But it did, in case anyone asked.
That one did
Yes.
as well. So you knew the feds
Yeah.
want you during the second
hmm
drop.
Well, I knew they were after me the whole time. That's the thing. Like, I didn't want anyone to think like I thought that I was this super uncatchable hacker, and that like I was going to never get caught. Like, I very much was like, eventually this is gonna, it's part of activism. It's more of at that point I didn't care when I got involved, right? Like that was just my activism. But I knew they were on to me when I went outside, and there was a Fed sitting there smoking cigarettes. Went after them, and he was so obvious, and I was like, oh sh. And I went that night and told my brother, hey man, there's feds out here, so I probably will get arrested. I went home. They run Netgear. That's the one. If you're a pen tester right now and you work for the federal government out there, I know for a fact you will know they have little Netgears, and these little Netgears gave them away. I was able to catch the PSK handshake off of it, and I was able to crack into it and pop in. Once I knew that, wait a minute. I was like, oh, I logged off and I went and laid down. Woke up in the morning, grabbed a cup of coffee, and boom, 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 boom. And I was like, I knew it was gonna happen. But it does suck. It's not the greatest.
Okay, so then you're caught, you're tried, you serve some jail time,
Yep.
then you get out, and part of the parole was that you can't be on the
Oh
internet.
yeah, yeah, that was really fun.
How does that work?
Um,
You can't watch Netflix. You can't obviously order anything off Amazon. If you had, I don't know if you had this at the time, if you had a like internet connected barbecue grill, could you have used that?
no,
Nothing.
I couldn't. I couldn't go home to my apartment that I had. My wife had already set up for us because it had internet at all. And then we had to get special permission from the judge to allow me to be in the same place as it is. Because if I can't go to a place where internet exists, then where can I work? Right? I can't even do hamburger jobs at this point. I can't do hot dog commercials. Like I can't, there's internet there, I am in trouble. So that was really hard. Once that happened, if you've seen the Showtime did a really good piece on me. You'll see where they talk about I had to actually write the code, have it printed up, take it to the shop, send it out, just so and a lot of people are like, well, why didn't you just put on USB? Why didn't you? We had USB, right? But this all had to be auditable. Like you guys, or a lot of people make it like, oh man, that would be easy to not look, guys. Like I get it, but prison's not something you rush back to. And when you have a person who's like, hey, you're cool until you start breaking that law and you start hacking or you start doing anything shady, and then you tell me you have a job that involves computer but not the internet. So now you're on computers, you're out of prison, you're already back on a computer. That's some red flags, right? Like I didn't stop learning when I went to prison. I had people send me books. I learned so much just in IDA Pro and debugging and all the diaries of a bug hunter and all that stuff that I read. Learning about kernel internals and stuff because you have years and years and years, and that's what you do. So I mean, it all kind of just evolved from that set, right? Like when you come home and you have for a year or so plotted and planned the next thing you would do when you got on a computer. I mean, you're gonna want to, you know, kind of handle that without getting arrested. And so that I kind of had to be a white hat for the longest time, right? I couldn't scan anything. I couldn't even get online. But eventually I proved that I was smart enough and capable enough to not warrant that restriction, and so it was finally removed.
So today you work on the blue team as a
Mhm.
defender. What was the mental switch like to switch from offensive focus to defensive focus?
Well, for me, there really wasn't one, and I have to explain that when I started in a blue team or in a computers at all, I was in that perspective. We didn't have naturally a security section. We were like system administrators, and then we had to fight pesky hackers, right? And that's kind of how that went. Like me becoming a hacker didn't mean that I wasn't blue teaming. Like to me, that's part of hacking is you have a server and that server's your space. And you're protecting that. If that gets hacked, if you go out there and say, "Oh, I'm a security researcher and I'm this, that, the other," and you get your website hacked from some 0 day, that's life, right? But if you get hacked because your passwords were in a open directory labeled passwords on your website, then that just makes you, a poor security guy. If you are storing your hashes in weak hashing, well, that's horrible, and so for me that mental switch wasn't there. I started defending from the mindset from the whole point, and I believe that actually makes me a better attacker. uh, and just the way my hacking makes me a better defender. When I go to hack, I'm looking for ports that I know I've had to administrate before. FTP, right? SSH, Telnet. I'm looking for things like that, and maybe it's because I'm old. Like, who looks for Telnet anymore? Right? We look for 80 443, right? We look for 22. Like, wasn't it DEF CON where they say like what was port 23 or whatever, and there's like, oh, we don't know. That kind of stuff is and it's not to take a puck at them, obviously, right? But it really does show the difference. Like that's kind of how I've had to go at it. Um, and it's really cool because then you can set it up. And because I love to hack, I mean, come on, everyone knows defense. The first thing after you're done planning and implementing everything, the first thing you got to do is you got to test it. And when you go to test it, that means you get to play the hacker. So really, for me, blue team is a little more fun than the hacking all the time. Pa, 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 pa. Because if you're not feeding back, or if you don't have a network that you're defending, um, which that's probably a reason why I'm not a professional pen tester all the time. Because look, if I understand there's buildings and there's companies and all this stuff that require once a year pen testing, twice a year pen testing. And then on top of that, there's some that have, okay, they can't even be the same vendors year after year. Okay, cool. That's the minute I put my fingers on that, that's going to be my network. I own it. I got root in that thing, and so I'll be really mad if some other hacker comes and does it. And like I don't know, I got that old school streak in me, so that's probably why I enjoy the blue team so much. I do enjoy hacking. I'm hacking on two targets right now. You can't see them the screen, but I do have two targets actually right now, completely different networks segmented off with VLANs and stuff. But I research all the time, but this is how I help defend my home networks, right? And it's I can use this now to know, ooh, okay, that's what they scan for. So if I see that scan, I can block them because they're scanning my websites with things like nuclei, right? Or they're scanning me. Ooh, that's an nmap scan. Cool. I know enough about the nmap that I can actually probably not only tell you how they're scanning me, what scans they have, but a lot of the options they chose too. And so those kind of things help me. And so for me, the shock really wasn't, oh, I came into tech being a hacker and I switched over to defense. It was I grew up defending and attacking, and I just got really famous for attacking.
There's an obvious adrenaline rush when gaining shells or accessing info. If you would have, if bug bounty programs existed back then, would that have given you an outlet instead?
It would have, but it would didn't mean I wouldn't have done it. I mean, the I saw, and again, I understand that's a risk for most people, but I did see something that I felt was worth fighting for, and why. And I don't expect everyone to understand that or accept that or anything like that. I do want to make it known that I wasn't hacking because I was a kid who was like, oh, all this pent up anger and I needed somewhere to go, and my dad loved me. I did this because I was like, nah, there was a policing problem then, I guess is the non-political way I'll say it. And so from there I was like, I have to do something. So I believe that just shows deeper character that, again, haven't been in the military, but I'm definitely a leave no man behind kind of guy. It's how I'm trained. For me, I hack great in a group. I work really well in groups, and that's why, I believe anyway that's just the way it needs to go from.
Okay, makes sense. Do you have any specific fields of research that you like to focus on now?
Oh, so much. Yeah. I love like raw web app hacking, to be honest. And I know a lot of people are saying that. I know a lot of people that actually like straight APIs, right? Like they just love digging into that. Miss me with that, right? Like, I mean, it's fun. It's really, really technical, and to a lot of people, that's what they like to do. I'm more of a, how do I get this app to do something that it wasn't designed to do, from the interface, right? From as the user. It's just the way I abuse things and works best for me. So web apps definitely.
And what are your favorite tools to use?
Um, well, I think it's like by default you have to say that you have a burp. So I do like to have my burp professional because honestly, um, I like OWASP's
Zap?
tool Zap. But for me, it seemed like it was always, when I first started using it, always breaking. And so I trained myself on burp, and then I hear they got really good and they're like, what? And I'm like, oh man, I'm sorry. I really invested so much time into burp that I've kind of stuck myself in that. But I liked a lot of the functionality you can pump into it. You can run headless burp and really do a lot of kind of big tests while you're in line with your automatic testing, and so you end up getting almost a double check of things. You start to find a lot of the smaller details. So when you do pen testing, you know that you either want to show up with a really big vulnerability that they can fix, and you can, it's okay, or you want to have a really pretty report. All right, you want to you want to say, look, man, you guys did okay, but here's about 50 things you could check, and here's some things over here, and some best practices over. Like you got to do that, and so it gives you that ability. Um, I run for like directory. I like to use my nerdy self. I like to use Amass, GAU, and Dursearch. Yeah, down the line for all of that, right? Like I just anything that can be automated, chunk that into a bash file, and let me read the log files. Let me read the output as it comes off. If I see something, I'll be like, okay, there we go, right? Runs a particular system. That version looks vulnerable. But ultimately all that stuff can be scripted. So that's the way I like to do it.
Definitely. So do you have any advice that you'd give to the next generation of hackers who may be in a similar situation to you?
I think if I was to pick the one, right? If I had the one rule, it'd be never stop learning. Never. If you come in here and you want to be the best and the baddest, do it. Don't come in here, you're not ready. You want to come in here and just be like, oh man, I don't know anything. And the community will drop all the knowledge you could ever want, and your brain will be so filled, and you just never give up and just constantly keep going. I know people who have picked it up and it's natural, and I know people who have picked it up and it's been a hard struggle. But I know that in every industry. Whether it's you're a biker or you're a professional Olympian swimmer or you're a gymnast, if there's a doctor, if your specialty, there's some amount of commitment and self-grit there. But this is one of those things where like literally if you just never stop doing stuff, whether it's no, right now I really like hardware hacking. Cool. Go spend 6 months to 5 years doing nothing but hardware hacking. If you say, oh man, I really get bored at network attacks, man, I'm really more of a web person. Same. And the minute you're doing that and you get another itch, you're like, man, I like web apps, but man, I really think that hacking telephone networks is the thing to go. Or yeah, I really want to go decrypt DVDs, where the young kids are doing nowadays, right? And and so that's follow that, and eventually, if that's what you love, you'll meet the right people, and you'll land in the community. As long as you're willing to learn, I think there's always someone out there to teach you. So that would be it.
What are your favorite resources to learn? I guess if you're focused on web apps, where do you go to learn new things?
Well, I mean, there's everywhere. Hack the box. I like to do what I call hacking and prod. I have my own home network. I'll set up my own labs, and then I'll go break them. Right? You may learn something from yourself. Default ports that you block and that kind of thing. There was a lot of things like ice server or damn vulnerable Linux now, right? There's lots of these hosted options out there too. INE is a good one, though I hear some things on there. One other end, there's a lot of services. CWN, right? My hacking guys. I don't know why I didn't think of that first. But Cyber Warrior Network, right? It's a game that trains you to play. Look, if you can find something that gets you into here, there's not going to be, although there is an actual book called the Hacker's Blueprint. I do suggest everybody, read it. But they're really, the best way to put it is there's so many options that as long as you're willing to learn, as long as you're willing to come in here, you will find. My favorite don't matter because my favorite are probably so old, and but I think that's probably the big takeaway. I promise there's something out there. If you don't want to go do it publicly, there's ways to do it privately. If you're more of a social hacker, there's social groups to get a part of. There's Discords and all that stuff. So it's a loving community.
It is, and a lot of knowledge sharing. If people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on all kinds of. You can find, sorry, little man. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on everywhere. Email addresses, LinkedIn. Come find me. I'm very open to talk to. I mean, there's no reason to dox me. I think even if you did, it's all public. I want to be approachable. I want anyone to say, hey. And there's at least one guy who's saying, come on, man, you can do this. Let me show you the way. So yeah, all over them.
Awesome. All right, Hidge, thanks so much for your time.
No problem, man. Thank you.
All right, that's it for this week. Thanks again for listening and leaving reviews. If you have any comments or questions, I'd love to hear from you. I'm at Jamoose on Twitter, or drop me an email at podcast@breachsense.io. And if you're part of a security team that needs visibility into your employees, customers, or third-party suppliers' breach credentials before criminals exploit them, head on over to breachsense.io to apply for a free 7-day trial. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back in your earbuds next Thursday morning.